Tēnā tātou. Kia ora, nau mai, haere mai ki tēnei kaupapa, ko Helen Lloyd toku ingoa. Welcome to this Te Pūtiyaki Manataonga Association of Educators Beyond the Classroom webinar, number 26 in our series, entitled Are You Listening to Me? With Judith Urry. So, as usual, we're going to begin with a karakia, and we will be recording this webinar to post on our website and our YouTube channel so that people who can't make the live event will have a chance to view and learn from Judith and what she has to say today. And I'll introduce her in just a moment. If you have any questions or comments for Judith, please type them in the chat and we'll come to those towards the end of our time together after the presentation. He karakia. Whakatakati hau ki te uru, whakatakati hau ki te tonga, kia mākina kina ki uta, kia mātaratara ki tai. E hi aki ana te atakura, he tio, he huka, he hauhu, tihei mauri ora. Well, I'm absolutely delighted that Judith has been able to find some time in her very busy teaching schedule to share some of her knowledge with us today. Really very grateful to her. I've known Judith for many years now. I won't say exactly how many. It might give away, Judith, how old we both are. But I first met Judith several years ago when I was working at Te Papa in the learning team as an educator. And Judith and I worked on a project together with some students at her school. She's going to tell you more about it in her presentation, but the nuts and bolts of it and the bit that I enjoyed most about it is that we invited her students to come and visit an art exhibition at Te Papa, and we asked students to take imaginative journeys through artworks and share what they could see, feel, think and wonder, and their interpretations were recorded and turned into an audio guide that visitors to the exhibition could listen to hear a child's perspective on an artwork, which was hugely popular and really fantastic. And Radio New Zealand did an interview about it. It was a really, really great project, and there was more to it than that, which Judith will share with you in her presentation. Since that project, Judith has gone on to take up extra training in early childhood education, has spent some time working in that field, and now she is the Associate Principal at Northland School in Wellington. Today, she's going to share some of her approaches to child-centered learning, play-based education, inquiry learning, and ways of integrating these ways of working into meaningful projects that can intersect with our sector when students are coming on visits to some of our culture and heritage places. So yeah, I'm looking forward to this presentation. I'm sure you're going to enjoy it too. So over to you, Judith.
Kia ora, everyone, and thank you, Helen, for the introduction and allowing me to present Are You Listening to Me? In this webinar, I would like to explore how we might listen to tamariki as they explore and observe the world around them, play, think, and wonder. Why take the time to listen? What do we then do with their thoughts and ideas when we have listened? And how can we deepen children's thinking by listening, embrace the concept of ako, through reciprocity of learning together, and share the joy of learning? So, who am I? Well, first and foremost, I'm a teacher. And although I've held many roles in 2 different countries and currently balance the challenges of being both a new entrant teacher at Northland School here in Wellington and my many roles of Associate Principal and Senko, I still am a teacher. And although I've worked with children from ECE to primary, I am a teacher. I'm a kaiako, and I'm passionate about learning and providing the space for tamariki to learn, to explore, to investigate, to question, and most of all, to dance in the rain. However, not today because it was far too cold out there. I'm sure it was snowing when I looked out the window earlier. So, as an educator, I'm passionate about ako and believe that the roles of a teacher and a learner are blurred. Teachers and students are on this journey together, side by side. Learning is not something that is done to students. It is done with students. I believe learning should take time and that strong foundations are better than getting to the next thing as quick as possible. I aim to be responsive to the tamariki I teach and want to create learning spaces that engage students and get them excited about the world around them. In my classroom, I value time observing, listening, reflecting, and documenting in the hope that I can make meaning from my teaching and from the students' learning. If my classroom was a waka, inquiry and play would be my hoi. Inquiry and a play-based pedagogy steer my practice. So over the years, I've been influenced by many people, experiences, and professional learning opportunities. I know my practice is still developing, even though I am an experienced teacher, but there are a few things that form the foundations of my pedagogy. I am influenced by the work of Kath Murdoch, an Australian educator who introduced me to the wonders of inquiry learning. I've recently begun to explore the openness of conceptual questions and love the breadth they bring to meaning and to learning. I'm influenced by the Reggio approach, an early childhood approach from the city of Reggio Emilia in northern Italy, which I try to weave through my pedagogy, and I hope to share some of that with you today. The Reggio approach is underpinned by some strong principles, and you might have heard of some of them: the pedagogy of listening, pedagogical documentation, the 100 languages of children, and the image of the child. I'm always searching for authentic context through which to teach so that children can see relevance in their learning and actually feel like they're part of the learning process. Some of my investigations have led to creating a sign for our local suburb, which we had to present a really special council meeting to get that approved and funded. I remember taking the children there and we sat around the council table and prepared a video for them to see. And 12 years later, I still drive past that sign every morning on my way to work, and it makes me smile. We made an art gallery in our local shopping mall, a playhouse for a child with diverse learning needs, and a cafe for parents complete with menus, table settings, and home baking. More recently, as Helen has said, I've undertaken further study to become an ECE teacher so that I can offer a seamless transition to school and to build on te whāriki and the amazing child-centred responsive learning that happens in early childhood education in New Zealand. In this webinar, I want to highlight how I use questions, a thinking routine called I See, I Think, I Wonder, pedagogical documentation, and play to listen to children during an inquiry or investigation. I'm going to show you some examples of my practice over the years and how these tools have allowed students to be active participants in their learning. I'm also going to make you work for me, and I'm going to provoke your thinking with some questions for your own reflection about how you might use some of these ideas in your own settings. So, questions. All my investigations and my inquiries start with questions. The power of a good question can't be ignored, and sometimes the success of an inquiry is dependent on what question you ask. This quote from Kath Murdoch highlights the importance of a good question. For teachers around the world, there is a moral urgency to work with young learners in innovative ways that nurture agency, curiosity, agile thinking, and problem solving. The role of questions in this cannot be underestimated. So what does this mean for me as a teacher? Here are some examples of questions I've used with children in investigations. Often a question is used to gather what students know before the planning and planning out the direction of an inquiry. So who am I? This was a combined art and social studies investigation. What is a story? This was an arts investigation that I'll share with you in one of the examples. What is weather? This was an investigation looking at the physical world and science. And I remember going out in the playground and pouring buckets of water all over the playground to see how weather might be made. Where is my place? This was a social studies investigation. What is movement? Was an investigation into science. And how can we show movement? was a follow-up investigation where we created an art show for parents at school. Picture Me Story was the investigation that Helen talked about at the beginning of this presentation. This was the work we did at Te Papa. So it was with a group of Year 1 and 2 students while I was teaching at Crofton Downs Primary School here in Wellington, and with Helen while she was working at Ngā Toi at Te Papa. We had an arts focus and wanted to explore how children related to different pieces of art. Helen came out and worked with us at school, scaffolding the children as they learned to talk about art. And then we followed up with a visit to Te Papa with the students. We posed these questions to students as they explored various artworks to really listen about what they were thinking and what they knew about art. The questions allowed children to think deeply about the artworks on display and not just comment on what they could see. Eventually, this inquiry led us to develop an audio guide for the children at Te Papa with Helen. So this is some of the children's thoughts about a painting as we explored this as part of the investigation. So we showed them the painting, and you can see, though it's very, very small, there's a whole lot of ideas that they pulled out from it, but I'll read you the ones that they were saying. It makes me feel tired because the background is dark like the night. I feel sad because there are big waves. The waves were strong and broke the canoe. When the Maori people went to the island, they got killed by the people. It was a long time ago. So you can see that with the focused questions we asked that I showed you on the previous slide, it really scaffolded the children's thinking, and their responses are so much deeper than if I'd just asked, tell me about the painting, or what can you see? Picture Me a Gallery was an investigation that was inspired by our work with Te Papa. The children wanted to create their own gallery with their very own artworks. We did try to convince Te Papa at the time to give us some walls to put up our artwork. I don't know if you remember that, Helen, but unfortunately our cheeky requests were politely declined. We did offer to bring our own blue tack too. Luckily, our local shopping mall came to the rescue by giving us an empty shop for a couple of days to install a gallery. They were really kind and painted all the walls white for us so that we had a clean canvas to put up all the artwork. As part of the investigation, the children added descriptor labels to their artworks with the names of their artworks and their artists' names. The labels also had QR codes on them, and we recorded the children talking about their artworks. In their spoken descriptions, the children focused on answering the following questions. Who am I? What do I remember? And what is important to me? Posing these questions was an opportunity to listen to children and deepen their understandings of their relationships with art. Sometimes inquiry questions are for the teachers or the kaiako and lead the direction of an inquiry as part of a centre-wide investigation. When I was working at an ECE centre called Daisies in Wellington, we'd been investigating children's understanding of whanaungatanga. A new library, Waitohi in Johnsonville, was being built near the centre where I worked, and the children were keenly interested in the construction that we walked past every day on our way to our Nature Explore program. As kaiako, we posed the question, how do children build a relationship with a building? And this led us to an investigation about libraries and the children's relationships with libraries, both as architectural spaces and also places where children belonged. We visited many libraries in Wellington by bus and train, as well as had the children's librarian from Waitohi visit us at the centre. We listened to children's thinking through their own photography, so we gave them cameras to take to the libraries, black and white drawings, and through discussions. In the end, in the investigation, we even had input into the layout and furniture design at the new children's section in Waitohi as an outcome of our work that we did in this inquiry. So a couple of questions for you while I've been talking. Do you provide outreach where you visit schools and centres as well as them visiting you to extend and deepen learning? And what overarching questions could you ask students to kickstart thinking prior to their visits? I see, I think, I wonder is a thinking routine created by Project Zero at Harvard University. I use this tool often in my investigations to listen to children, especially if I want them to really focus their attention on an artifact, photo, or an object. It is also a great tool to hear children's ideas, develop deeper thinking, and to encourage children to ask questions. I often wait to plan a next step in an inquiry until I've done a session using I see, I think, and I wonder, as it often produces some real gems to direct the next steps in learning. In this example, I used I see, I think, I wonder to investigate an inquiry into tūranga waiwai with a group of Year 0 and 1 students at Northland School here in Wellington. We'd been finding out about our maunga by visiting it, painting it, and drawing it. I used this photo of Te Ahu Mairangi, taken from the Botanical Gardens, to listen to the students thinking about places that were important to them. Here are some of their responses to I see, I think, I wonder when looking at the photo of Te Ahu Mairangi. Remember, these responses are from children who are only 5. I see my house, my whole house, because I live right by it. That's the mountain. I think Te Ahu Mairangi knows Māori stories from a long time ago. I think they are in his heart. Te Ahu Mairangi was silent and saw the old times when people from England arrived on their boats. I wonder if Te Ahu Mairangi might have put the communication tower on top so people could hear the stories of Maui. After listening to these children's ideas, we went down a whole new tangent and spent some time in the investigation learning about our local pūrākau, talking about the role of place over time, and created different ways to communicate the stories of Maui. The final outcome of this investigation was to retell local pūrākau through art and storytelling and share it with the parents. Here's another example of using this thinking routine during an investigation into how our bodies move. This was a group of Year 1 and 2 students at Northland School. I see, I think, I wonder was used to listen to children's ideas about how bodies move. Sometimes the routine shows up misconceptions, which then leads to new directions in an investigation. I see the muscle. It helps us be strong, and the muscle is an organ. I think the veins send messages to your brain. I wonder if the bones are inside or outside the bit. How could you use this thinking routine to generate ideas or questions with students prior to a visit or during a session at your centre? And if you want to know, there's I think, Mel, you've put a link to the website for Project Zero, and there's a lot more thinking routines. So especially if you're working with older students, they go into some quite complex details. So I see, I think, I wonder works across the school, but if you want something that's a little bit more deeper or where children can compare things, then there are some other ones there on that website. Pedagogical documentation. I could start another whole webinar trying to talk about pedagogical documentation, but I'll try and explain what it is in a really simple form. Pedagogical documentation is a tool and a strategy that makes children's learning and thinking visible. It's a fundamental aspect of the Reggio approach and one I've been using in my own way to make learning visible during an investigation or inquiry. Currently, my documentation is an A3 book that I write in, and it's the way I plan, record students' voice, reflect, revisit, and assess learning. I've also in the past used wall displays, slideshows, and I also use electronic reporting systems such as Seesaw and Storypark to document children's learning. There is no set way to document, and I claim to be no expert. So this is just the way I do it. Carla Rinaldi is one of the pedagogista from Reggio Emilia. She says that documentation is not only a way to make learning invisible and thinking visible, but a way to assess children's thinking too. She says, our interpretation of documentation has evolved from a fundamental question that we ask ourselves as teachers and educators. How can we help children find the meaning of what they do, what they encounter, and what they experience? How can we do this for ourselves? These are the questions about the search for meaning that influence the development of our identity. Why, how, and what? Here is an example of some pedagogical documentation from a social studies inquiry into how is the past important to people and how places in New Zealand are significant for individuals and groups. This inquiry I undertook with some Year 2 and 3 children at Silverstream School in Upper Hutt. Wanting to focus on our local curriculum, I chose to investigate a local landmark. Not far from the school, there's a plaque showing where a cottage once stood. This cottage is called Pumpkin Cottage. This was a place in Wellington where artists would travel by the train to paint at the banks of the Hutt River. In this example of pedagogical documentation, I've recorded a shift in the inquiry when a child asked about why did people take photos? Sometimes children's ideas spark a new direction or help plan the next steps in an inquiry. During this investigation, we visited Expressions Gallery, Whirinaki Whare Taonga in Upper Hutt. Here we explored a number of the original artworks painted at Pumpkin Cottage by some of the artists. We also created a collection of watercolours for parents that we had painted during the workshop at the gallery as a conclusion to the inquiry. Pedagogical documentation is not just about recording children's ideas, but they're there to show my thinking too. I use documentation as a place to question, wonder, think, and plan. Resharing the documentation also allows children to revisit their thinking and deepen their learning. So some more questions for you. How could you get classroom teachers to document students' thinking prior to a visit and then use that documentation during the session to build on ideas? How do you think you could use documentation between sessions for developing some next steps in learning? That is, if you're lucky to see the same group more than once. And what documentation could you keep as a spark for other groups to see, which might create a collaborative investigation over time? Play is an essential part of my everyday classroom and underpins my pedagogy. Play is children's work and is not frivolous, unstructured, or an excuse for handing over the learning to children without the input of a skilled teacher. Play is planned for, scaffolded, open-ended, dynamic, and deep. Play allows time for children to explore their thinking, their working theories and ideas in a calm, collaborative, social, and focused way. This quote by Stephanie Menzies sums up the importance of play. Play produces curiosity, openness, optimism, resilience, and concentration. It enhances a child's memory skills, develops their language skills, helps regulate their behaviour, advances their social skills, and encourages academic learning to take place. In this example, some Year 0 and 1 students at Northland School, I wanted to highlight the importance of play in children's learning. These photos show how play was an integral part of this investigation, which was into tūranga waiwai at our school. learning about the places that were important to us. We made Wellington, Te Whanganui Tara, out of boxes. This was following a workshop with Lisa Tarini, who I know is presented on this webinar series as well. And then we played with these boxes over the following term and a half. Yep, they took up 3/4 of my classroom, but we stacked them away every night and put them out every morning. Loose parts, that is open-ended objects, were added to the city to extend children's thinking. I did have to put a halt one day when they put wooden planks between the boxes, and then on top of the wooden planks, they put very large river rocks and then were crawling underneath them. I told them that wasn't particularly safe. Our local ECE centres bought cardboard replicas of their centres when they came to visit our classroom on transition visits, and we observed children making sense of Te Whanganui Tara through their play. We even made block people using photos of the children to play with in the city. This investigation was enhanced by a visit to the Wellington Museum, and we had a trip into the city where we'd organised a trip up the James Cook Hotel to have a look down on the city, trip up Mount Victoria where we could see it from the other side of the harbour, and we also walked around all the way up Lambton Quay in the middle of lunchtime traffic, so we made quite a spectacle, but it was good fun. There's sometimes when you're on a trip where you realise that you say things that you'll never say again. So when we were in the James Cook Hotel looking out at the city, we turned around and we said, please, will you stop licking the windows? As we turned around to watch some of the children licking the windows up the top. But never mind, it was a great day. And Wellington put on the most stunning day for that trip. But play doesn't have to always happen in the classroom. Each week, we walk up our maunga, te ahu mairangi, and play for a time while we're up there. We listen to the children develop their relationship with this place as they run, build, hide, and explore. The rocks you can see in that picture are a play material that the children have returned to time and time again. Each time they play with the rocks, they are deepening their understanding and building their relationship with the place, their tūranga waiwai. And as a teacher, I listen to their learning and document their play each time we visit, taking notes of their developing ideas. We then revisit the documentation each week to further build on the children's thinking and also to plan our next trip up the maunga. Recently, we completed a show for parents based around our trips up the mountain, including singing. We wrote our own poetry. We created dances which were all linked to the different spaces up the mountain. We made a piece of percussion which we performed, and we baked biscuits in the shapes of birds and gave them to parents in the cafe that we had created. The children made many of the decisions for the show, including what it was about, what songs we sang, and how the cafe would be organised. They told us they wanted to make the table numbers. You can just see one in that photo with the round table. Decorate the tables like the different places up the maunga that we visit, and created bird costumes too. Please note, we don't run with all the ideas that the children have. They wanted birds flying across the stage pulled by counterweights, and they had great plans for remote-controlled staging that would move things on and off the stage. A little bit ambitious for our time frame and for our budgets, but we do run with the things that we can. So, how can you use play to listen to children's thinking? How is play a powerful learning tool for you? And what materials do you have to offer children in your space to develop play as a way of listening to learning? So I've been on this journey for many years, and as I said at the beginning, I claim to be no expert, and every year I change my mind about what I'm doing. But I've learned lots of things on the way. I've learned that this way of teaching is exciting, joyful, and a wonderful way to teach. You never know quite what the children are going to come up with. and that you have to run with. Students are highly actively involved in their learning, and you just can't fault them for their participation. Teaching is responsive and dynamic. I never do the same thing 1 year in, 1 year out. Collaboration is fostered between all participants, and I think students really know that they are an important part of my planning, my teaching. And, you know, when we bring out the documentation, they know that everything that they have said as part of the inquiries is written there, and they can't wait to see their names. I really know that the outcomes are important, and I think the projects that we've done over the years to have that real life outcome, like the gallery guide, has been really important, and it's really memorable in terms of both the teaching and the learning. Just the other day, I was really lucky to have a student contact me who is now in year 10 at one of our local colleges, who I taught when she was 5. And she said, "Can I come and spend the morning in your classroom because we haven't got school today?" And as we were working, she said, "Do you remember when we did such and such? Do you remember?" So I know this kind of teaching is memorable for students. And I think what I've learned most on this journey, especially by listening to my students, that children are confident, they're competent, and they just know so much about the world around them. And we've got a lot of learning to do from them. So thank you for the opportunity to share some of my mahi from over the years. Hopefully I've inspired just a little bit for you to try something, or maybe just take that little bit of time to listen to the children. They are amazing.
Thank you so much, Judith. Wow, your enthusiasm has really shone through. I think I neglected to say in my introduction that one of the things I really admire about you is how reflective you are in your practice and how you're constantly feeding yourself, learning, growing and developing as a teacher. And as you just said, you never do the same thing twice. You're always developing new ways of working, which is just so refreshing and inspiring. I think we can all hope to be like that ourselves. So thank you. And you've generated a lot of chat, a lot of conversation in the chat. You've probably been too busy.
No, I didn't see.
Giving your presentation to see some of the chat, but yeah, there's been some great conversations between people about the things that you've been presenting. Some people have shared when they've done something similar in their culture and heritage context to what you've been talking about. So I'll just scroll back to some of those and share back some of those to you. And then, because we've got quite a bit of time left, and then if anyone thinks of any questions that they'd like to ask Judith, pop them in the chat, or there's probably time to take the mic and ask them directly if you wanted to. You could press the little hand symbol at the bottom. So we've got a comment. I'm just scrolling back up. Monica said that hello Monica, by the way. Hi, nice to see you. That they don't offer outreach. That's up at the treaty grounds in Waitangi, but they're wondering about using Google Meets as a way to connect with classes before they visit, because a lot of their classes come from a long distance away, so it's not so easy to just pop in and see a school prior to their visit. And then we've had another comment from Talia saying that they use the I think, I wonder thinking routine along photos or video clips sent to schools prior to visits. And then the wonder part of that becomes one of the questions that students bring with them when they come to the visit, which is fantastic. And I'm sure that's exactly what you were hoping people would take from your presentation. So it's great to hear that some people are already working in that way. And they've suggested that can be done online using a tool like Padlet, which is, obviously quite a good visual tool. What else have we got here? And they've also used that way of working during times of lockdown and COVID, when sickness, when people can't come to their organisations, to make those connections from a distance. And what else? Oh, people from the Canterbury Museum have also said that they use Padlet. They've used Padlet like that to encourage teachers and students' thoughts to participate, and again used an image of an object that they were going to encounter at the museum ahead of time. So I'm really thrilled to hear that people are doing that before visits. And yeah, Debbie said that she's done a similar activity when you're talking about building the Wellington with boxes, and she did a similar activity where she built a map of the local environment using Lego boxes, models, and talked about how the town had developed. That sounds really fun. That looked like such a fun, playful activity. And so many cross-curricular links, which is really cool. Yeah, so I'm really thrilled to see all of the chat that's been happening amongst people. You've obviously inspired lots of thoughts about people's practice. Okay, so have we got any questions? Just having a look. Oh, somebody says they want to come to your classroom. I'm sure you'd be open to that, wouldn't you, Judith?
Yeah,
quite
always happy to have visitors, always happy to collaborate in any way possible.
So I've got some questions. I think what I was really interested in, like through all of your examples, you've shown that you really use visits outside the classroom to really enrich learning for students. But I've noticed that, or maybe this is a question, do you do that mostly at the beginning of an inquiry to kind of stimulate thinking? Do you do it in the middle in response to ideas that children have had, or do you position it towards the end as a kind of culmination of thinking and learning? Within, I suppose I'm asking, when do you think is the best time within an inquiry to make a visit?
I think it depends on the inquiry. If it's one where you want to use it as a provocation for where you're heading with your inquiry, I would do it near the beginning. But if it's something that you don't know is going to be there until you've listened to the children, then it might be in the middle of an inquiry. So I don't think there's any right place for a visit. Sometimes inquiries naturally lend themselves to you pre-booking, and then you might actually be working up to a visit. So I'm just thinking about the inquiry that we've just started this term, where we're linking in with the histories curriculum and doing stories of migration. We've started with looking at who am I and who's my family, and I know that we want to go on a visit, so I've already pre-booked that. But I'm almost working in reverse with my students, knowing that that's where we're going in a couple of weeks' time, and sort of building up to that visit, where other times I won't know that we need to visit somewhere until we get much further into the inquiry. And then there are other inquiries where you might go as a kind of rounding off. So I don't think there's any right place for a visit. I think it's also knowing what's available in your local area, but also asking questions, because sometimes what I've found has been really useful is when I've contacted an external provider and said, look, this is what I'm thinking, can you offer something, rather than it always being something that's already pre-planned. Because sometimes I look at sites and go, oh, that kind of fits, but it's not really what I want to do. So I know it's not always possible, but I found it really good when I can actually ring up and go, this is what I'm thinking, what can you do for me? And that you actually then work in collaboration with the centre to kind of decide what works the best. And I know it's not always possible, but I find that I really like that. Like, I know we're going to go out to the Wellington airport, and I rang the lady there and I just said, look, can we come and visit? And then we got into this really long discussion, and we've now planned a visit. So I find that I really appreciate it when actually I can make it really targeted, rather than just come and do a program that maybe is a set program, because that doesn't always meet the needs of what I'm looking for.
That's funny, because you just answered my second question without me having to ask it. That's so funny. You must have been reading my mind.
No, I just really like it if we can target it to the inquiry, and if I can sort of say, look, this is what we're doing, or, you know, take a scan of the documentation that we've already got and say, this is where we've got to, or, you know, such and such a child asked me a question 4 weeks ago and we've parked it, but I can't answer it. Can you help? So I think it's about really being responsive to what we need. And I know it's really hard because you guys
But leading on from
you've
that,
got your set. Yeah, sorry, Helen.
Sorry to interrupt you. Carry on, Judith. I won't interrupt you. Carry on. Finish what you're saying.
No, I know it's really hard because I know, you know, the set programs are really there for a really good reason, but there are times where it just doesn't fit. And then I sort of look sometimes and go, oh, I really want to do that. And then we don't end up doing it because it just doesn't work with the direction. I pre-plan all our inquiries. I've got my inquiry book just here. So I do pre-planning, but actually it's not the way that I necessarily go. So if I show you that's the pre-planning for this term, which gives all the possibilities of where I might go with this inquiry, but I may only go down one tangent. And so if I'm restricted or booked a visit that maybe won't work in another 3 weeks' time, sometimes it's nice to sort of think, you know, can I change it or can I adapt it to make it work for where we're at?
I suppose leading on from that question, Debbie's put a couple of comments in response to that in the chat about that, you know, at Wairau National Army Museum, they work really hard to offer bespoke programs for schools. They do as much as they can before a booking is locked in to negotiate with teachers to make sure that it is meeting their needs. I suppose the flip side is, like, as a teacher looking at websites, you said, you know, you look at websites and you look at programs and then you think, oh, that doesn't fit. What can we do from, you know, as culture and heritage education providers, what can we do in terms of signaling to teachers that things are flexible, or, you know, this is, you know, how can we describe the kind of realms that we could work within, or how much we can be bespoke? Because I think a lot of people struggle with that. They design a program, they advertise it, they put the curriculum links in, but they also want to be flexible and open. And it's like, how do you communicate that clearly?
I wonder, you know, most places that I've looked at your websites, you know, you've got all the, you know, the lists of the programs that you offer in the year groups, and, you know, there's a description. I wonder, alongside those ones, there's one that says flexible planning, or, you know, open-ended workshop, and then, you know, we do it around this, or these are the collections we've got, or just contact us. You know, open-ended workshops, please contact us, you know, and then really encourage people, because I know, you know, talking to teachers in my team when we've been trying to book things, you know, they go, oh, well, we'll go to this place because of this. And I go, well, where does that fit in your inquiry? And they go, oh, well, no, it's just a good trip. And I'm always saying to teachers, you know, it's all really nice to just go on a good trip, but if there's not the connection between what you're doing and what we're doing, then it's just a good trip. And I don't see that really deep meaning. So yeah, as long as you've got it somewhere on, if you're willing to do flexi, then just celebrate it on your websites and say, just contact us, or, you know, we're open to collaboration, or we're open to planning a visit that suits your needs, please contact us, so that teachers know when they're having a look that they can do that. Because I think some people just go on and go, oh yeah, that's what's offered. And maybe, you know, if you're not brave like me, you might not actually have the guts to ask. So
I'd like to hand the mic over to Debbie. She's got her hand up. What would you like to say, Debbie?
Hi, Debbie.
Hi. Hey, thanks for all that. Just thinking, it's actually taken me back a few years in time to the 1990s before all the rules came in. And one of the best school trips I ever was able to do, and heaven help me, I couldn't even bring it now. We took 2 busloads of children from the Kapiti Coast to Wellington. We had loads of parent helpers. We divvied the children up into small groups and said to the parents, we'll meet you back here in 4 hours. And that was it. And we had one group that ended up in the reserve bank in the vaults. We had one group that ended up on a fishing boat. We had people that ended up, they just went everywhere. And it was probably one of the most exciting trips that I think we ever did. But coming back to being in this industry, we encourage people to ring. We offer, like if teachers are coming through during the school holidays and they call in, they can come in for free and have a look around, and we can have a chat with them and say, look, you know, this is what we can offer you. Every door is wide open. It's just getting those teachers to click that it, you know, like you said, ringing up the airport and having this long discussion and ending up with something that fits what you're doing. Well, we're the same. If people ring up and they say, look, we're actually doing this, where does that fit? And we go, oh, we can offer you this, this, and this. How does that sound? And we all end up happy. And it's not, as I put in the comments, rainbow's end, because it's just a trip, because it's a nice place to go.
Yeah, and I don't want to waste anybody's time by just being a trip. Like, you know, from your point of view, you know, out in your centres, if you've got a school that's just coming because it's a trip, then there's not that buy-in either for the students. But if it really fits with the inquiry, it must be exciting to see that they're bringing their prior learning, and then, you know, they're going away with something as well that they might carry on building.
Because like we had a group today, they were from Auckland, and they'd been on camp and they wanted to come to us because they were looking at the Tangiwai disaster. And so they just wanted a tour originally, and then they said they were stopping at Tangiwai. So we put together a plan for them, but because they were travelling back to Auckland today, their time frame was really tight. And believe me, it was icy at Tangiwai at 9:15 this morning. And so we did the tour with them, came back here. We only had a very short period of time, but every parent and every teacher and most of the kids said, we want to come back and we want to spend a lot more time here. So that was a taster of just giving them a little bit of what they wanted in that tiny time frame, which hopefully will lead on to a rebooking and a lot more people later.
I think there's an interesting point you just made there, Debbie, as well, about time. Like sometimes, you know, the workshops are down for, you know, an hour and a half or, you know, whatever. And sometimes, like, especially with the really little children, I think, you know, can we come in for half an hour, you know, or can we do this bit and then just meet with you for, you know, half an hour or whatever. And it's about that flexibility. And I think that goes back to, you know, being open for teachers to actually know that they can contact you. And I think that is a challenge, you know, making sure that teachers know that you're there to help. But yeah, just being flexible about what that group at that time actually need. Yeah.
No, I mean, it was really good, but yeah, at least it means that potentially we're looking at that group coming back. It's another 60 odd kids. And the adults were incredible as well. They were really interested in everything we had to offer. So, you know, it was good.
Yeah, and I really like what you said, Judith, in your presentation about really building on students' thinking and inquiry happening before the visit, so that we hit the ground running when they come to us and we already know what they're thinking, we already know what their questions are. They have already started to engage with what they might be learning when they come to us. So you haven't got that kind of frosty start and that building from the ground up. You're actually already connected. You've already got that thinking happening, and you're building and growing and deepening while they're with you. So I really like that message. The other thing I'm really keen to ask you about, if we don't get any more questions, is that about the documenting learning, the pedagogical documentation that you talk about. I don't know how many people in our sector do that while they're with students in our centres. I think maybe there's a time frame thing. It's quite a short time. I haven't seen it happen myself, but maybe people are doing it out there. I haven't done it. But it's made me think about capturing student voice, because I know that when we do evaluate our programs, often we go to the teachers and we ask, you know, did it meet your learning needs? Did all of those questions about evaluating the impact of learning. But I don't know how many of us are really good at getting authentic student voice as an impact of learning or an evidence of learning. Have you got any suggestions for us about how we could do that?
Well, we collect that raw data in quite a few different ways. So the final copies that you see, you know, that I had on the slides, they're not done in the moment, because I use it as part of my reflection process as well. So I've gathered data in quite a few ways. So Usually, because I work in a collaborative space, there's two of us during a discussion, so two teachers. So I'm just sort of thinking, you know, if you're leading a discussion with a group of students who are in your centre, you might ask the classroom teacher to be the recorder. So we record it just on, we've got clipboards, and we actually have taught our children that when we are gathering children's ideas, that's an important part of our process. So we can have 5-year-olds who sit there for 40-minute discussion at times because they know that their voice is going to be recorded. If we were just having a discussion where we're just going, oh, we're going to talk about this, then, you know, you've got the rolling on the floor and the legs over the armpits and things like that. But actually, if they know that we're going to do something with it, and we say to them, we are putting this in our Mahi Rangaho book, you know, we need to hear everybody's ideas. It's amazing how long our children can sit. So generally what we do is we split the roles. So one of us is the questioner, and we have our questions that we want to ask, or we have the discussion leader, and then the other person's scribbling furiously and saying to the children, actually, can you just hold that thought, or you've spoke too fast, or can you repeat it? And the children actually get really good at knowing how to actually work within that space. I have also done it through video, and then that of course takes quite a bit of time to transcribe that later. With older children, you could do post-its, bits of paper. You could use some of the electronic things like Padlet was discussed. You know, there are lots of ways to collect it. And then part of the pedagogical documentation, which of course, you know, I could only briefly mention about it, is that actually that reflection, like what is important, how might you group that information, which information is really important, where are those questions that are really those ones that you're going to run with, or where is it just a general discussion. We also use something called talk moves as part of our maths learning, and that's about teaching children different ways to add on to other people's ideas. So our children get really good at going, I heard so-and-so say such and such, I'm going to add on to the idea. Or I disagree with what you've just said, I'm going to say such and such. So we have the ability to actually layer those things in, which you wouldn't be able to do as part of a, you know, one-off or a, you know, a session. But I think it's about how do you use the classroom teacher as well to support you with that, because surely they want to hear what the children are saying as well. And maybe, you know, that's about retraining some classroom teachers, dare I say it, about when you go to a visit to a museum, you're not checking out and letting the museum educators or the art gallery educators do all the work, that you're there in collaboration really as teachers in that space. So maybe it's about, you know, the educators leading the discussion and the teacher recording, and just working out different ways of keeping that information.
Yeah, thank you. That's really great tips. And I'm thinking as well, as you're speaking, that would probably be useful for you as a teacher to have that documented thinking and learning from the session to take back and build on in the classroom as well. Not so, I mean, I asked the question thinking about for us from an evaluation perspective, we need to demonstrate the impact of learning and sort of have some tangible evidence of that. But equally, it's probably just as important, if not more important, for you to be able to take that documentation and build on it again in the classroom.
Yeah, like I wouldn't, you know, I would sit there and be documenting it all anyway, because it is part of our inquiry process. But I think that's that mentality as well about not just having a visit out of school just as a tag along, actually does it have an essential role as part of the inquiry. And then, you know, back to your question, Helen, about, you know, assessing or evaluating a session. Well, definitely ask the children, they're the experts. And I think it's about really valuing children's voice, that actually they're the ones who can give you the feedback, really. Yeah.
My other question is about, you know, being responsive to children's thinking in the moment when they're on a visit. I mean, obviously, you do lots of that responsive thinking and planning and evolving your inquiry over a period of time, you know, several weeks or days in a classroom setting. Whereas how responsive do you think it's possible for us to be in our short time with students? You know, like if you had negotiated a visit with us to learn about certain topics that children had already shown interest in and we're building on their learning, but then when they get there, they're suddenly interested in something else. Like because when we had our ECE webinars, they talked a lot about that, you know, being responsive to young children and what they're interested in. And so I guess it's a fine balance, but have you got any thoughts on that?
I think it depends. Like sometimes if you are able to take that sideways leap, it's really good. But I think also it's about being able to say to children, you know, you might have asked me that question and I haven't got the answer now, but I tell you what, I'll find it out and I'll, you know, be in contact with you in the classroom and follow up on that. I think it's, you know, like there are times in the classroom, like I'm just thinking back to the investigation I shared about the show that we did about Te Ahu Mairangi. They wanted that show back about week 3 of term 1. But we kind of had a trajectory in our plan of where we wanted to go. So we actually said to the children, we hear you, we've recorded it, and we're going to do it in week 8 or whatever of next term, but we've got a lot of work to do in between. So just hang fire. And they kept on coming back to us about it, and we kept on going, yep, it's in there, just wait. So I think sometimes it's about letting children know that we don't have to respond to every single need there and then. And I think in this modern world where you can click a button and you get a response, you know, sometimes they are impatient, but you can say to them, actually, we hear you. And I think that's a really good thing to say. I heard that really good question, or how amazing that question you just asked me, so that they know that you've heard them. Yeah. I'm actually going to park that, or I don't know the answer. Shall we, you know, find out for you and then send it back to your school? Or perhaps we could organise another visit with your class, or, you know, and actually be in the moment and say, I hear you. Because I think if we just go, oh, no, that's too hard, and don't actually acknowledge to the children that we've heard them.
That's so important. I love that. I hear you. I acknowledge that. Let's park that question, but hold it. We've had a comment from Canterbury Museum that they use Peer Deck as an interactive way for students to comment or write thoughts or questions. And the responses are anonymous, which is quite useful, and then they can send it back to the classroom teacher. So that sounds like a really cool tool. Just, I know we're starting to run out of time now. I've just got one last little thing I want to pick out of your brain. That thing, the idea that you said about having children's thoughts or questions or ideas visible somewhere in our centres for other children to see as a spark for their own thinking. Have you actually seen that anywhere?
Haven't seen it.
Have you got any ideas of how we could do that effectively?
I just think it's the joy of being able to be collaborative with other schools. You know, you must have certain programs that, you know, probably are ones that lots of people come and engage with. And if you've got a display, or there's a board where you could actually build that documentation over time. So, you know, this school came and these were the questions they asked. Or, you know I use it with the Mahi Rangahau books that I have, that it might be a different class that I've got, and we pull out the one from the year before and go, look, this is what these children were thinking about. What's that sparking your thinking? So it's about collaboration beyond just that group that you've got. And you could actually say, look, this group that came in, you know, 2 weeks ago had this question, which we never actually got to answer, or they've gone back to their centre to, you know, investigate it further. What does that make you think? So it's about kind of opening up the learning beyond just the group that you've got in front of them, and actually building collaborative knowledge.
Wow, this is so good. I'm really aware of the time now. We've had such a great discussion with you, Judith. Thank you so much. But I think, unfortunately, I'm going to have to draw this to a close. Mel has made a comment that there's such good conversations happening in the chat that she'd like permission from everyone to sort of copy that chat and use it as a resource on our website. So if anybody doesn't want to be involved in that, let us know. But if not, we'll gather all of the links and all of the chat and the comments and repost some of that content for other people to share in the learning that's happened today. So thank you, Judith. It's been a really, really amazing webinar. So before we close up with our final karakia, I just need to let you know a couple of things. So our next webinar, we've got Puawai Cairns, who leads the Audience and Insight Directorate here at Te Papa Tongarewa, sharing some of her knowledge and experience around Mātauranga Māori, bicultural museum practices, amongst other things. So that's going to be really awesome. It's on Thursday, the 25th of August, in a couple of weeks, same time as usual, 3:30 to 4:30. So we'll look forward to seeing you there if you can make it. And another little reminder that we've actually got 3 courses now available on the Future Learn platform. I know that some of you have been into some of these courses already or are currently studying them. You just sign up for free, and there's some really great discussions happening amongst educators within these courses. So we advise you to sign up at a time when you've got a bit of time available to work your way through them so that you can do it in the free time. But yeah, we look forward to seeing you in those courses and responding to your questions and ideas. We've also just created a sector report, a midpoint evaluation report. We've gathered all your feedback and everything you've told us about how we've been doing so far in this project with the webinars, the mentor program, the online courses, and the Kai Mahi Māori program. So that's available on our website, or Mel's just put a link to it there so you can read the feedback that we've gathered. So thank you if you returned the survey. Yeah, and finally, we will close with karakia. Thank you, everybody, for coming today. Unuhia, unuhia, unuhia ki te uru tapu nui, kia wātia, kia mama, tinako, ti tinana, te wairua, I te ara takatā, koia rā I rongo, whakariria ake ki runga, kia tina, tina, huie, tai kie. Thank you, everybody. Bye. Look forward to seeing you next time. Mā te wā.